So it's really a pleasure to introduce this Learning Lab conversation between my father and Elizabeth Florent. Elizabeth and my father have been close working colleagues for over 2 decades together, and they've been forging ahead in the field that initially was not recognized, and creating new perspectives when it comes to leadership. I think both of them bring a very unique perspective, and I'm excited that you can see them interact today. In my role as the managing director of KDVI, I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of leaders and coaches who tell me how their lives have been transformed for the better by my father and his wider team. And it's a privilege to be a part of this work, to foster it, and to bring it to other leaders. We've chosen to run this session in support of a new transformational program that we have launched called the Leadership Mystique. It's for senior leaders, and it provides them with reflection time, support, a learning community, and really time to consider and make changes that are important to them. This Learning Lab conversation, though, brings together, I think, a widely diverse audience, and as usual, from all corners of the world. And you may be interested in the program, or you may be interested in the process that the program brings leaders through. And you're all very welcome. And I look forward to hearing what both Liz and my father have to say. Maybe they're also looking forward to what they have to say.
Exactly.
I'm not quite sure what will come out. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you, Oriane. Just to let you know, the way the flow will go, we thought that Manfred and I would, or I would ask Manfred some questions that will hopefully be of interest to all of you for about half an hour, and then you can start to generate questions in the chat, of course. After about half an hour, then Alicia will help us to manage the questions in the chat, and she will be able to spotlight those of you who have asked a question that you'd like to have answered live by Manfred. So that will take us probably for about an hour or so, and then we'll see we'll see what happens after that. It is always a surprise, and always very much a pleasure to talk to Manfred. We had a chat of about an hour just last Friday, I think, just to sort of think about what we wanted to share with you today. And even that chat was a pleasure for me. So I hope that we can bring a lot of ideas into the room. As Oriane said, some of you are here because you're interested in the Leadership Mystique program. But what we'd also like you to think about and ask questions about is, what is this type of work that we do? You might be interested in, sort of pulling open the curtains and seeing what is done, or you might be interested in the concepts that are behind it. You might be interested in what it feels like to be a person who goes through this program, and how do you come out the other end. So we'll open the floor to questions, anything that has to do with those themes in general. So with that, I thought it would be a good idea to sort of bring Manfred's experience and background into the conversation to set the stage a little bit, because as many of you know, Manfred is an economist, but also a psychoanalyst, which always was and still is quite an unusual combination of worldviews and approaches to working with people in business schools. So Manfred, I wanted just to start by asking you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, in particular as a psychoanalyst, and what you bring into your work from psychoanalysis. I know you say you do whatever works, but can you tell us a little bit about how you weave this training and this experience together?
Thank you, and welcome everybody. I must say, every time to explain experiential learning is not easy. And I always fail, but I can at least give it a try. Now, coming back to your question, Liz, when I was at the Harvard Business School, and there was a lot of noise made about structure and strategy and all those kind of questions, but there was not much attention given to the person in this whole setup. And the time it was a famous book was by Loris and Lorsch. What I've been trying to do is actually to bring the person back into the organization. Now, as you said yourself, even though I'm trained as a psychoanalyst, I do whatever works. I stand on my head to get any movement. And now in the beginning, of course, people are always very wary about when they think about psychoanalysis, they think about Freud with a heavy Viennese accent. I have also an accent and a couch and things like that. But what I was trying to do is to help people to introduce to another dimension, the dimension of dreams, fantasies. And one of the things I have to do with executives is, you know, you get, when you're born, you're a little bit like a psychotic bomb. And so parents have to make something out of it. But sometimes there's too much structure given to the person. And by the time, now how to get them back into the sandbox in a way, to think about that other things are possible. I have a memory. There was one person I had a few years ago, they had a reunion. And I asked him what he got out of the program. And he said, you know, it was like I was back in my college days and everything was possible. And of course, from an clinical point of view, as a facilitator or teacher, whatever you might call it, I have to create some kind of, you know, the word is a kind of funny word, transitional space. Also, I have to create a space for the people that they feel safe, that they fit, and there's a certain amount of trust. And as a teacher, I think for 20 years, I taught the core course of the MBA program at Harvard, INSEAD, and also at McGill. So I know how to do that, but I use lots of case studies. I've written probably over more than a few hundred case studies, and of course the traditional approach of the Harvard Business School, which has been the advocate of the case method. But in the class I teach, I mean nothing bad about case studies, by the way. You would be the case study. So I said, you know, Liz, why did it take so long to finish your doctorate? You know, that would be one of the questions which you probably, what is going on? But tell your story. And it is not so easy, you know, when you have 15 minutes, because even though we are storytellers, what are we going to tell? And it's like, I always say, it's like you have to do a documentary of your life. So what scenes are you going to pick there, which are important? If you don't say anything, you don't get anything. So what is the interesting thing about it? And so I think some Italian neuroscientists talk about mirror neurons. They started, anytime a person tells a story, as narcissistic as we are, we think about our own story and said, my God, I had the same experience. It's not just me. Other people have it too. And so and on top of that, when you said, what did I do when I was in that situation? So also the altruistic motives come out. So it becomes a very powerful learning experience. When people tell a story, lots of fantasies go through your head, lots of emotions come up. And then also, as I said, it's a very powerful learning experience. And also for the person, of course, who tells the story, it can be very cathartic.
So let me unpack that a little bit, Manfred. So we can see that basically the psychoanalytic principle of the transitional space of.
By the way, I never use the word psychoanalytic, very rarely, because people run away. People run away when you talk.
That's right. I think that's another thing that you say very clearly is that you need to start where the person is or where the group is. So the background of what you're saying has to do with this openness of possibility. So these are the sort of the psychoanalytic principles, let's say, that are the foundation of your training, which is that you open a space of possibility, you create a space that's comfortable for people to, as you say, go back to the sandbox and play, and also to share their stories. So I want to underline the point that you make, that you have used many case studies, you've written many case studies yourself, but what you've found over time is that, and I think you've said yourself, is that you would be in front of a room of 20 people in one of your programs, and you realized that there was more experience in the room than in 100 MBA case studies. So you brought in the ability to create this safe exploratory space, and you really pioneered the process of using the live case study, which, as you say, is that someone would say to me, something that was obvious that I needed or wanted to talk about. And I think that's an important point as well, which is, again, you begin where the person is ready, and probably just at the edge of their comfort zone. So it's not the kind of thing where the person finds himself in the hot seat being attacked right away. It's a sort of a gentle process of opening up and helping the person discover where it is that they want to go in this program. And you use the term experiential learning. And let me just see, I think that what we're talking about here is a good description of experiential learning. Do you want to say anything more about experiential learning, how people learn in this kind of space?
No, I mean, people say I'm quite impatient. And if you think about, I've been at INSEAD, I think I've been a pioneer in team coaching or group coaching, whatever you might call it. If you deal with a client on a one-to-one basis, it can take an extremely long time before the person goes where maybe you feel he or she should be going. When you are in a team setting, things go faster. It's the old saying, when one person tells you have ears like a donkey, ignore it. Well, if 10 people tell you so, get yourself a saddle. So when you have certain issues, for example, in my class at INSEAD, a lot of the learning is not in the class. A lot of learning takes place outside the class because people make jokes about certain things that happened at breakfast time, lunchtime, and slowly. So people may have an insight, but to work through this insight and practice different forms of behavior, the people are very often stuck in certain patterns, takes some energy, and with the help of the group, there's a quicker, higher possibility that you create tipping points. So the course at which I've been doing far too long, why do I've been teaching that course for 32 years now. I got a little bit bored with the MBA. I knew how to do that, but the course there is different because you have 21 lives and I have no clue what's going to happen. I've interviewed them. I looked at some of the dossiers. They get horrible questions to answer. So I want to see if they have a little bit of psychological sense. Otherwise, I have to work too hard. If they completely have no sense, that maybe a one-to-one. But then you have to make something out of it. And I've been a very active writer, and my stimulus for the writing has always been what happened in the class, because there are 21 lives, and I have to create a certain space within the first week, because the people in the class are very senior and also very impatient. If they feel they doesn't get any value, they disappear.
Yeah.
So
yes,
so I've been quite lucky in that respect.
Yes, so this is a space that's opened for the experiential learning space is something where people come in with their stories and also their emotions and their experiences, and they learn both from telling their stories or reflecting on their stories, but also from the input from the group. So we'll come back to that.
It's a little bit more than that, Liz, because I have to weave it. I used to be a columnist for a newspaper, and so I think one thing I can do, I can make difficult concepts very palatable. I mean, as you already touched upon, is you have to talk the language of your clients. It's very important. That's so I always been very much again psychobabble, management babble, and all this. I get very irritated. Go to a doctor and they use all these difficult words. No clue what they're talking about.
All right.
So I try to make it palatable.
Very good. So that's an excellent opening for one thing I wanted to ask you, which is here we are to talk about the leadership mystique. But I also would like to understand, what is your definition of leadership mystique? What is leadership mystique? How do you develop and why do you need it? What's the point?
Leadership mystique is just a word. I mean, I wrote once a book, which actually I like, which is called The Leadership Mystique. And I think the people who are propagating this particular workshop pick that up because it gives some mystique to the mystique. Now, leadership in a way is, people come to me and say, I want to be a charismatic transformational leader in a few easy lessons. I said, go somewhere else. There must be a snake oil salesman somewhere who tells you that. But if you want to learn something about yourself, as a result, start to react differently. In other way, I mean, the famous definition of insanity, to do the same, it's not actually, it was attributed to Einstein's probably not true, to do the same thing over and over again and hope for different results. And you see it with relationships. I mean, people marry the same person, actually another version of it, and they fell into certain traps. So I want people to become more reflective leaders. Before they act, they think, why am I doing so? For example, when a person makes a presentation, And of course, the people there have, in the first place, by the way, it's very difficult for, I take 21 people at INSEAD, 21, they're used to talk. And they hope that people listen to them. But suddenly there are 21 narcissists in class. Rather, you have to be somewhat narcissistic, otherwise you don't reach the senior position. And so they have to put a hand in the air and say, I want to talk, which is it's a little bit, but it's already the ability to really listen what the other person has to say, because we are terrible listeners, because we're so busy formulating an answer when the person is telling something. So that element is already, and actually the funny thing is, at the end of the week, they're exhausted just by sitting in class.
So if I make a bridge between this idea of the leadership mystique, which as I listen to you, I understand it to be, there's something about being a mystique to yourself or a mystery to yourself. So as a leader, sometimes being a leader, and I hear that from people as well. They say, you know, actually, I don't know what it means to be a leader. I'm not sure if I can do it because I don't know what to do. So the idea that it's a mystique to yourself, we can go into the level of maybe your subordinates or the group or the people around you, and there's a mystique around that involves biases, implicit biases. It's almost like a fog of confusion, the leadership mystique. But I think what you're saying, one of the first steps to working through the fog or understanding what's real and what is maybe not necessary or a fantasy, is to talk and to listen and to share your stories.
Most people, there's this famous statement by one of the wise men of Greece, Thales of Miletus, was 600 years before Christ. He was asked what's the most difficult thing in the world. And the answer is the obvious one, like also found on the Temple of Apollo in ancient Greece. Know thyself. And most people don't know themselves so well. Now, how do you get some deeper self-knowledge? One way, at one point in time, I was the director of the Leadership Center at INSEAD, as you know, and we had lots of coaches. And since coaching is not mass production, I mean, I can talk to 10 people or 1,000 people, but for coaching, it's a small group. So they needed some material. So you get things like 360, or I call it sometimes 720, because I give people usually in the beginning 2 questionnaires, one which is more organization oriented, and the other one also has to do with what's happening in your private life. See how what kind of persona you have, and maybe it's very different. And so it was very helpful. This kind of information was very helpful to the coaches, but could also sometimes be a narcissistic injury to to some people. I mean, but at least again, it creates some tipping points. There's the other questionnaire I had to develop. I'm not a psychometrician. I mean, I had to do it when as a kind of defensive move. So I developed a number of questionnaires, which is the personality audit, where you have your private people from private life and public life. It's always interesting when you see the spouse and children who give feedback. And what I very often see is that, my boss is an idiot, my colleagues are idiots, my direct reports are idiots. But when your grown-up daughter tells you, Pa's an idiot, my God.
That's right.
People don't like that. They start to think about that.
We used to say that was useful because it was a snapshot of basically where the person was at the time that the things were filled in. Now I hear people say it's like a screenshot. So times have moved on. But I think what's also interesting with those, again, along the idea of how do we sort of unweave or work our way through the fog of the mystique. One thing that's quite interesting about those instruments that you use or other tools that can be used is actually what the story they tell you in combination. So what can be very revealing is if you're looking at something to do with others' perception of your personality, and then you also look at leadership behaviors in completely different domains. You can also, of course, consider life balance and also the kind of stress that the person might be under, either too much stress or not enough. And when you start to bring all of those sort of outside pieces of information together into the group, then you start to have a quite a rich holistic picture of a lot of the dynamic forces in the person's life. And again, it's important to remember that we talk about these things, or we use these tools in the context of the person's professional life to a large extent, because that's often what people are looking for, is professional career development and so on. However, we can also say, and we clearly see, that there really is no division between personal and professional life. So although, again, we work with where the client or the person is, they may wish to stay primarily in the professional domain, or they may have questions that might arise about the personal. But the idea is to integrate the two in a way that works for the person, not to neglect the personal, but also to keep it within the context of the work they want to do. And that's where these 360s can be very useful. I want to ask you
And
another.
let me stop you here for a moment. I think you touched upon it. What I try to do is first to create more reflective executives, so they don't go into knee-jerk reactions. Many people, we have Jung talked about your shadow side, and helping people integrate the shadow side into the whole personality. Because some people prefer to, what they don't like about themselves, to put into boxes, and they put a lid on the box. But I always make a distinction between you can jump or you can fall. And what do you want? Do you want to at least have some control over your behavior, or it just comes out without you realizing it? So, the comment I made sometimes, everybody is normal until you know them better. So getting some sense of yourself. The second thing I think people learn in a program like this is to create more effective teams. And most particularly top executive teams can be extremely dysfunctional. And sometimes I call it a completely impossible act because of the power dynamics that play a role. The third one has to do is, I introduced my own narcissism, a term called the authentic organization, which is basically a term, a Greek word, two words together, authentikos and zotikos, basically organization where you are alive, feel alive. I remember actually years ago, I was going to Denmark. I took a plane to Denmark, arrived in Copenhagen, took a taxi, and the taxi said, I want to go to Baksvaart. I said, Baksvaart, you're going to Novo Nordisk. That is such a great company. My father works there, my brother works there, and I would love to work there. And you see that when you can say, I want my family and friends to work in the organization, that's a good place to work. And of course, the other part has to do with, you touched upon it too, Liz, is having a balanced lifestyle, whatever that means. But there's a kind of, this is a famous study. I was making a comment yesterday to, I see there is Weer, is sitting there also. He was waving at me. I was making a comment. I used to give my students a book called Lives in Progress by a man called Robert White. And it was a very famous, it's actually one of the most famous, if the most famous longitudinal study about, they took some undergraduates from Harvard and they followed them until now. Some are still alive. So it was probably 1938. And they also did a control group in the kind of downtown area of Boston. And when they asked the people, they had 4 directors of this program. I mean, it's a long program, some people died. And actually, if you're interested, you can see a TED talk of the last director. But the most important thing, and I tried to touch upon it a little bit in a book I wrote called Quo Vadis, is the element of belonging. That they said the most important thing for us when we look at our whole life is having good relationship with family and friends. And unfortunately, when you look at the life cycle of people, typical MBA, MBA in our school, they're around average 27 years old. They're so busy with other things, they start to forget those things. It might come back later. When I get them in my class, the average age I tend to be 45. By the time they have their first divorces, the children hate them. Lots of things are maybe more than one divorce. And so there is a lot of, they have had quite some narcissistic injuries, and they start to become a little bit more reflect. On top of the major narcissistic injury, of course, you look in the mirror and say, my God, wrinkles, I need glasses, hearing aids, whatever. And for men, no longer Don Giovanni, they're real narcissistic. And really, when you're
you fix them, you cure them.
No, I don't cure anybody. You're under 45, you're probably immortal. So after 45, it's time left to live, and that's a major narcissistic injury.
So let me just look right exactly at that point of who who was this program or this type of experiential learning for? Let me give you an example, 3 examples, and maybe you can sort of build on these to develop kind of a composite uh, uh, participant for us. But the first is, you talk about being a reflective leader. And so many people have come to me and said, could you please give me like a timeline for that, or an agenda for my day, or like a checklist, because I don't know what that means. We talk about reflective leadership, but I don't really know what it means. So I think that's one of the kind of the challenges that people bring into your program. Another type of participant.
You make it too complicated. Stop here for a moment. I mean, a very simple thing you can do is, what gives you energy? If you talk about, when a person comes, let's ask you, when you think about your week or your day, what gives you energy and what drains you of energy? It's a very simple thing, the energy barometer. And some people you realize are toxic. Of course, they can sometimes be your family members. That's bad luck. But I mean, stay away from toxic people.
And you need reflective time to be able to even figure out who those people are, and to recognize why they're toxic to you and why they're potentially toxic in the organization. But to come back to my question about the potential people who benefit from this type of experiential learning, I've also heard, some of your participants or people who are.
You want my answer to that question? I have no clue.
Okay.
I mean, that's the reason why I like the program, because I don't know. I mean, I interview the people, I go through their dossier, because I developed some kind of number of questions which are horrible. I think it's the worst series of questions in that application form, but it's the beginning of the journey. And then I get lots of surprises, because.
So yes, and so the type of person who I think in my experience, and I just sort of picked 2 quotes of what I've heard from people. One who said, I'm a CEO. I've been a CEO for 15 years. I've got 50,000 people in my organization, and we're in semi-big trouble. And I just need, again, the reflective space. I need to be able to come into a group of my peers and be able to think through this.
I never get those people to tell me that. No, they will never tell me that.
It unfolds.
You're lucky.
It unfolds. And then another one I've also heard is that sometimes a CEO just needs to come up for air. Again, this is the idea of needing a place to share and reflect, because we talk a lot about the loneliness at the top, the fact that it's very difficult for some people in these positions to find anyone that they can really talk to openly. And you yourself have said that you like to call these kinds of programs CEO recycling seminars. So I wonder if you can tell us just a few, maybe 1 or 2 typical type of people who might be interested in this type of experience and what they might get out of it.
I already said so. I mean, there's fortunately, there's no typical person. If that would be the case, I would not do it anymore, because I'll get bored. No, it's, of course, we're all human beings and we all have certain, but typical, no. It's always a detective. I mean, I have to play somewhat of a detective to figure out what's person's inner theater like, and what can I do to be helpful, and what can the group be. I mean, that's another thing. As I told you, the advantage of doing things in the group is more complicated because of the group dynamics, but you have a better chance that certain tipping points are occurred. And the major tipping point, I mean, I remember that I gave a talk sometime. My first university was in Holland, which was the University of Amsterdam. And I look at my cohort, what happened to them. The second university was Harvard, and where actually I learned teaching, to be honest. The first one was not so glorious experience as far from a teaching pedagogical point of view. But I was giving a talk after 50 years later. I volunteer. I usually don't volunteer for talks. And I was thinking, if the people in my cohort at the time would have had Psychology 101, it's a fantasy, maybe they wouldn't have had such bad marriages and bad career choices, because I think about many of the people in my class. And the main issues people struggle with, particularly when you are in your, when you talk about MBA students, has to do with, do I choose the right partner? And as you know, we have a pretty bad success rate there. Lots of people are not very successful in that. The second one is, what is, given my psychostructure, what is the best job for me? To figure that out. And so and there, of course, I'm very pleased to hear that, for example, at INSEAD, after everybody gets coaching now, actually, even the MBA students, which was the largest group, and they have to make those decisions. So what I do in the program, in the beginning, they talk probably about how to become a more glorious executive, how to run a better team. They might be in an M&A situation, and they want to say how some culture compatibility. But eventually, they talk about actually their relationships, the closest relationship, and how they can make it better. And so that sometimes it creates, that's the reason the program is quite long, quite some existential concerns. You know, is this, now when you're at 45, and you talk about a 45-year-old group, what I discovered very often that people are in parallel lives. I had a few years ago at a class, there were quite a number of people who said, you know, we had some children, and it sounds very trite, and now we have the empty nest syndrome. We could talk about the children out of the house. We have nothing to talk about. We are like, you know, brother and sister living in the same room.
So again, it's a group of people who are sharing similar, as you say, parallel lives, in the sense that what they're going through is similar, and they're discovering that they're not alone in these experiences. And it sounds like what you're saying is that it would be good if MBA or younger people could have these kinds of experiences earlier in life. But what you are seeing is that the people who come to you to have this kind of experiential learning, it's almost like a second chance, or it's a time to revisit some of these earlier experiences that possibly they were not able to fulfill or think about at the time. Is that what you mean by recycling?
Now, life is not rehearsal, unless you believe in I mean, people want to feel alive. I think it's one way, and as I said, at midlife, probably you become more aware of one big motivator, which is death. You realize that there's a cloud. We have the frontal lobes. As a result, we know we're going to die. And you become more aware. I said already, under 45, you're probably immortal. You don't realize that. When you become more aware of it, I said, what can I do to get meaning? When you think about the little book I wrote when I was waiting for this, my editor to finish the leadership, the CEO Whisperer, which was kind of an other book I wrote. The pandemic, I was very productive because I realized how much time I spent traveling and giving lectures, and I was stuck somewhere. So I wrote, I think, 8 books, which was kind of rather crazy. But the Quo Vadis really has to do with what brings you meaning, what brings meaning in your life. And so there are a number of factors in that. One has to do with what am I really good at? I mean, it was, talk about different forms of intelligence, and some people are very good with their body, physical intelligence, good sportsmen and women. Other people have musical intelligence. So what really gives you sense of flow, to use this word used by this man with impossible Hungarian name, Csikszentmihalyi. So you lose a sense of time. Then you also have to look at the future. What is my purpose? Then you have things like control. I mentioned already 2 most important decisions you have to make in life is the choice of a partner and the choice of what am I going to focus on. And then I mentioned belonging. So do you maintain the relationships in people important to you? How you go about that? And some people really mess up their relationship. And then added to this particular circle of belonging, competence, control, purpose, I added transcendence. Now, people, and the statement, people work for money, but they die for a cause. So how do you bring meaning? As an executive, you have to go beyond just, you have to get meaning for it. Of course, it becomes difficult in certain, we make the best cigarettes in the world. It's not exactly maybe always too stimulating, but people have a fantastic capacity to rationalize. But I try to also explain to doing things for others is very selfish. It's good for you. You might even live longer. This kind of giving is better than take. Of course, you need a minimum amount of yourself. So in the end, and I wrote once a book called Sex, Money, Happiness, and Death, which has everything in it. But it basically is what brings my life meaning, and to become aware of it, particularly since the clock is ticking. And sometimes too many executives are engaged in a manic defense. They're very busy all the time, very busy. And I get too many. I have a number of CEOs which I deal with on a more one-to-one basis. And one person keeps on telling me, I have no life. And I start to laugh. You're the major shareholder. You're the CEO. And you have no life. Now, take some control over your life. Do something about it. Take some action. It's your choice. It's not just, fate rolling over you. So those kind of, and to become more aware of, create a greater self-efficacy. And again, what I'm saying is that when you do this in a group, I don't have to work so hard. I've given an example a number of times of a lady, I mean, I've said many because I found it was kind of funny, call her Maria. Now, Maria was the chairman of the board. And in my class, at least in my class, she loved to talk. So when she raised her hand, she talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And so, you know, I have 21 people in this class, and I want to be fair about airtime. So I always say, that's Maria, I have to give her a chance to talk. But when she was talking, I said, my God, shut up, Maria. Shut up, please, shut up. Of course, I was polite and I kept my mouth shut. I've sometimes, I must admit, I've said, shut up. That has happened too, when my impulse control was no longer there, but I let Maria talk. So it's a modular program. So 2.5 months later, there's Maria again. Not a peep, not a word. So I got very worried to get Maria. What took her aside? I said, Maria, what's happening? She said, at lunchtime, my colleague narcissist told me I take too much airtime, I talk too much, I don't listen. And in the period in between, I practiced by listening and learned a lot. So the narcissist cured the narcissist. And that is the power of the group process that you get. As I come back to my statement, when one person tells you ears like a donkey, ignore it. But when 10 people tell you the same story, that, my God, maybe there is something there. If you get 360 feedback and your daughter tells you, your father, I mean, there's some, he could do something about certain things. You may not like it, but it's sitting in your head. You might dream about it. By the way, it's an interesting thing. In the class, the first day when start, I ask people, I have to get them in other words, do you have any dreams? And they look at me and say, no. I think they say, probably I dream. And you have 4 to 7 dreams every night. So I think I dream, but I don't remember. Fine. At the third day, on Wednesday, it's diarrhea. The dreams are coming. It's incredible. Suddenly they realize some of the symbolic world. And when you have repetitive dreams, when you have nightmares, which is very rare, children might have nightmares, small children have lots of nightmares, then, somebody's trying to someone is trying to tell you something, you're not listening. And to interpret a dream, which is very difficult, you have to realize when you try to dissect the dream, you're the director, the producer, and the scriptwriter. It's a little bit like fairy tales. I mean, I have written quite a few fairy tales, which I find are very educational. But fairy tales are not fairy tales. And
so with that, Manfred, maybe now it's a good opportunity for us to listen to some of the others in the group. I think I just want to sum up what you've said in what we've been talking about in the past half hour around the experiential learning, which is to say that there's an early phase where it's an exploration between you or the person who's running the sessions or the conversation to see if the person is ready to go into that kind of exploratory space. And then you open for them a space of experimentation and reflection. So it's a bit like a Mobius strip. It's back and forth between experiments and reflection. And I think a lot of what you've been talking about here is it gives us a very good, rich, evocative picture of the kind of conversations and the kind of directions that you take the group towards or that you dive into while you are together in the group. And I think just to finish our reflections here, you said to me at one point, the thing that you really try, the objective, I said, what is the objective, Manfred? And you said, really, I hope to give people a sense of agency so that they come back to a feeling that they are more in control of their lives. And also, as you've just mentioned a moment ago, a sense of purpose, so that they have a sense of why they're here on earth and what they could be doing. And finally, I think something that's very practical but very important is that after this type of experiential learning, they get a sense that they can cope. First of all, that they can understand why things happen to them, why things happen in group, what are the dynamics in the system, and they're better able to cope. So when you're a CEO or chair of a board and so on, the sense of just being able to have really that kind of data, access to data that you didn't have before, is a very important objective. So now I'd like to
wait a minute.
Okay, one last thing, Manfred.
No, Liz just got a doctorate, and I marvel at her way of conceptualizing things about different things. Because that was her area of expertise, and she's doing it very well. I mean, I was being intrigued by a Dutch painter, which I don't necessarily like his painting, Karel Appel, and he was asked, "How do you do it?" He said, "Just muddle along." I mean, that's what I do. I just muddle along. And a lot of it is very intuitive, and it's just nice to see a person how to conceptualize the things I do, because
that's been my role. That's been my role for many years, Manfred. That's one of the beauties of our relationship, I think, is a good different perspectives on what we do. But I think now I would really like to open for any questions. I think Alicia will help us manage the spotlighting of the questions. I see there are lots of comments in the chat. Let's turn it over to you.
Alicia, I don't hear you.
So there are no comments. Oh, let's see. I do see one now. So I'm going to spotlight Tom, and let's see, and then maybe you can ask it. Tom, if you want to ask the question.
Tom, I hope the sound is better than Alicia's sound, because you're sitting somewhere in Singapore. I don't know where, but it's a funny sound, I must say.
I'm in the jungle. Okay. Tom, over to you. You want to ask your question?
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm calling from Japan.
You're also far away.
No, they're pretty far away. Yeah.
A better sound though than the Singaporean sound at the moment, for me at least. I'm in London. I'm in sunny London at the moment. But it's the first day of sun out of the days I was here. But that's anyhow. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I love your concept of opening the space for possibility. I'm actually working on something similar to that. I guess the question I would ask, how would a facilitator such as yourself create such a space where people feel that there is a possibility?
Let me, I had to create an icebreaker. You have this 21 people who don't know each other. They're in the room, and they're probably quite anxious. Everybody's anxious. I'm anxious too. I mean, I have to ask myself, is it going to work? What is going? I mean, I interviewed them, but as I said, everybody is normal until you know them better. So I'm not sure what it's going to be. And I used a simple icebreaker. One is actually, it's very simple. Do your self-portrait. And they look at me. Actually, I did it once. That is 32 years ago. And now there must have been an INSEAD probably 100,000 self-portraits. And nobody collected them. And it would be an interesting book to have the most interesting ones there. So you do use, and when they look at me, say, "My self-portrait, I cannot draw." Like, I cannot draw either. I said, "Yeah, your children draw, you can draw too." And so I get them all somewhere in the halls, on the floor, and they start with self-portrait. And they get into it after a moment. They can, and then you have to explain the self-portrait to other people. And it's a quick way sometimes to get into another dimension. That's the first way. And of course, then the next thing is, and it's very early in the game, I pick a person to start, which is not easy because that sets the stage. And I have to coach them a little bit because I have to, I can, of course, people might understand that when they were 5 years old, they were bounced on their head, and that's the reason they're so crazy. That's very interesting, but it has to be a little bit more. So also, I mean, I remember doing workshops with executive teams, and you get this different 360 or 720 instruments. But the most interesting thing is tell your story. But it should be a little bit of a pattern in a story. So what was it like when you were a child? If you want to understand the person, you have to know a little bit about the history. And the first organization you know is the family. And how you deal with power and authority, it's very much dependent how the power and authority was in the family. And there's a concept called, you might have heard of it, transference. And I'm not talking about transference pricing, but transference really is no relationship is a new relationship. All relationships are colored by previous relationship. So if you had a very autocratic father and you got into fights with your father, there's a good possibility when you meet the person who reminds you of your father, you will get into automatic pilot. So in every room, in every when two people in the room, there are not two people in the room, many more people in the room, which has to do with the people in your background. So if you make a presentation, say something about the dynamics in the family, what were your parents like? Were you the only child, or more children, to get a sense? And then talk about some critical moments. What is it like, for example, to have dinner in your family? How is it run? You know, and of course, interesting to me is that at INSEAD, which has no national identity, for example, the 21 people I usually have are 60 nationalities. So you get a lot. So you learn a lot about different nationalities. You know, what is it like to grow up in Japan? Very different from growing up in Malaysia or growing up in Russia, etc. So, but again, the mirror neurons always work, or Nigeria. The mirror neurons work overtime. You start to say what it would be like when you have a person who comes from a little village in Nigeria. How the hell did you end up somewhere in Europe? What was your journey like?
I think we can also point out, Manfred, you pointed out many times that the part of the reason for this sort of opening is that the person begins to identify some of the patterns and themes that were present in the past, the experiences that formed them, but possibly even more importantly, they're able to revisit these patterns and themes in the present and apply them perhaps in leadership experiences.
Now, the most important thing actually is that they should realize what was a very effective behavior when you were 10 years old may not longer be effective when you're 40. You have to find out, because at the time it was a defensive act to be able to survive in maybe sometimes very messy family situations. Now it's, and the thing is, what is important to many of them is they're having children. And do you want to, you know, the famous poem, they fuck you up, your mom and dad, but they were fucked up in their turn, you know, that kind of thing. Do you want to repeat this fucked up behavior? And to try to break this cycle. And many people repeat the same behavior to their children, to do something very different. And that actually is a very strong stimulus, because children are great teachers, and to become more aware of that kind of thing. And they don't want the same neurotic behavior they have, and which has really crippled them a little bit in their life, passed on to the children. It's a great stimulus very often.
So it's important, Manfred, but then probably the follow-up question might be, so let's say we've thought about past experiences. We're looking now at how that affects my leadership behavior, but how do people go on after this kind of experiential learning, in this kind of space? How does their leadership in the world change? What do they do differently or better, or what is really the concrete and practical outcome of this kind of exploration?
At the INSEAD program, I deliberately also at the last module I waited half a year. I want to see if they have internalized their behavior. At the same time,
let me ask, what behavior do they internalize?
What they learned during the process, what they should do differently if they have internalized that. They don't fall into the same traps again. They become quote unquote more reflective leaders. Then also there is the element that, which is kind of nice, and I think WhatsApp has really helped in that respect. Many of these people know each other, which is actually also tragic. They know each other better than their spouses do, which is kind of interesting too. And so they become a support group for each other. So they meet each other in critical moments. So I have one group, then I think they're meeting in Japan, they have a new reunion 25 years later. It's very intensive relationships they have developed, and they're very supportive. What is an interesting evolvement, I talked about it actually yesterday when I had at dinner, about what I call the critical incident method. If you have developed an environment where people trust each other and they know it's a safe environment, that they are in a helpful mode, you can do this critical incident method, meaning, I have a problem right now. I have, for example, I'm going to have an interview with my CEO, and I know he's going to send me to Timbuktu or whatever it might be. And given the children at a certain age, I don't want to move. And how should I go about it? So what I mean with the critical incident method is quite simple. The person has maybe 10 minutes to tell his dilemma or her dilemma. Then there are maybe 20 minutes of questions of clarification, not interpretation, just clarification, asking questions to clarify for the people who are not clear about it. And then the person who had made the presentation has to keep his or her mouth shut and just listen. And for half an hour, people can free associate. And it's kind of remarkable when you have this, when you have created before that this transitional space, a safe space, that in an hour, people get many different ways of looking at the problem which they were stuck with to get them out of the stuckness. And it's a simple message, nothing to it, but you need to create this kind of ambiance before it can happen.
And I think
that happens, I guess, after the program. Many they will do it themselves. I got just an email from they have a reunion in Switzerland, and they said, you know, how should they go about it? What will she do? And things like that. But that I told them, this is what you can do now. People will come. People come after a year or so. You haven't seen each other together. Go around and find where they are.
And even what's something that I think is also very important is that we also hear that people, that there is the cohesiveness of the group. But in addition, I think that people after this type of experience can go out and create these kinds of groups amongst their work teams. For example, they are able to develop a kind of a reflective space where people can almost do this kind of critical incident and get ideas from each other, not only from people who have been together in a program, but they become almost in a sense the facilitator or the convener who is able to create this kind of group.
This is much trickier.
It is, but that's one of the things that they do become able to do.
I know, but I'm trying to say is that there is a difference. I mean, I remember when I started to experiment with this method for teams, it took me some time because people would come to me and say, listen, you only take one person per company. We have 7 people on the executive team. It will take 7 years. Can't you do it all together? I said, nah, it's too confidential. It becomes. So finally I started to experiment. Actually, the first experiment was in a German company, a German bank, and it worked. But you have to be more careful because there's the ego of the CEO you have to deal with. That the CEO doesn't get paranoid and you cannot, after all, they have to work with each other. How far can you go? So it's much more delicate boundary management.
It is
an open program.
But I think what we do find is that it is possible. And the other thing that I was thinking, and then we'll have another question from the group, but the idea of what happens after the program is there's the idea of the executive role constellation. So in other words, you don't, as a leader, have to be good at everything. But if you become aware enough of your own capacities and your own weaknesses, then you can create a better executive team around you so that you have the complementarity of skills and strengths in the group rather than trying to be all things to all people yourself.
Actually, I developed, again, when I was the director of the Leadership Center, an instrument called the Leadership Archetype questionnaire, which really points out. It's funny that you could use the word executive role constellation because it was a title of a book written by my mentor at Harvard at the time. It come out of the.
I remember.
It's interesting. It pops up somewhere. But sure, you're very right about in this questionnaire which I developed, which I talk about 8 different roles. From change agent, coach, communicator, transactor, you know, the trains have to run on time, and innovator and things like that, and as you said, leadership is a team sport and make people aware what they're good at. I always say, do a 2x2 matrix, like, don't like, important, not important. So don't like, not important. Why are you there? I mean, that's one of the people who say, I have no life. I'm a CEO, I have no life. What are you doing in this quadrant? Then you have not important, but like. So go fishing. It's good for the soul. I have my best ideas when I walk in the forest to do other things, or go swimming or whatever it might be, but not necessarily sitting behind my computer. And then you have don't like, but very important. You will never be good at it. Give it to somebody else. Let the other person do it.
Yes.
Now, of course, where you should be is like and important. There you add value.
That's
And they have
exactly
to
right.
figure that out. And again, I come back to the energy barometer. What really gives you energy? You know, listen to your body. You know, listen. And again, I want to emphasize again, although sometimes you're stuck with certain situations, get away from toxic people. I mean, you have only one life. Do you need that?
You have some interesting questions.
I don't know. I haven't seen the question, so I don't know.
Yes, Alicia will.
I
These
think
two.
I can, yeah, because this bounces off on what you just talked about. So Nilanjala has asked, do participants feel judged for their character and competence when this peer consulting happens? And I think related to that is also, how do these reflection circles work with a group who do not know each other and have not established intimacy?
Do you want to highlight the people who have asked
Yeah,
to maybe
I'm
do
gonna
one
highlight,
question at a time? Yeah.
let's
and
do Ninjala first because she asked. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I have to go back to Elko as well.
Sure.
But I think this relates to
Spotlight, yeah.
Yeah.
And CM.
if you could ask your question and maybe
If I can answer, it's a different story. Huh? I mean,
You
I
just-
usually my
just
writing is always
wait,
about people who ask questions I cannot answer.
First you have to let them ask the question.
No, but
Then we'll see.
I just want to be. I want to qualify.
because she's not on there. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi.
Thanks for this opportunity, and it was lovely listening to this entire piece of how do you put up the space for understanding the leadership story. One of the questions that I had is, when people are meeting in some constellation where they are the CEOs and they come in with a lot of power and authority, do they feel judged or somewhere for their character, competence? Am I good enough? Does that feeling come in very strong when they are in that session? That's something that I really wanted to understand from you. And if so, how do you actually let them, keep that baggage aside and move ahead?
It's a loaded question, to be honest. I mean, it depends where you come from. Some people feel always judged. There is somewhere in the sky are some parental figures who seem to tell you that you are not perfect. And I think one of the things you have to do as a facilitator is to have a more benign superego. You have to learn self-compassion, to be nicer to yourself. And many people are not very nice, never good enough. And as I said, it depends. I mean, part of their success might be that they were searching for, I can do better, I can do better. At the same time, it might make for a miserable life. So, self-compassion and self-care is very important. Being forgiving to yourself. I mean, not only forgiving to others, which is an important factor to have a more balanced life. I mean, if you don't forgive to people, you poison yourself. I think it was Gandhi who said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That kind of thing. But also forgiving to yourself. We all make mistakes. I mean, look at myself. I don't learn from my successes. I learn from my mistakes. And that's part of also the deal in organizations. I remember I wrote once a case study about a man called Percy Barnevik. At the time, he was one of the most famous executives in the world. And he said, I remember saying, they said to me, the best thing you can do in my organization is to make the right decision. The second best is making the wrong decision. But I fire you if you make no decision. And then he hoped for a 70% shooting average. Of course, if you make the same mistake over and over again, I guess he's not going to be kind to you. He was not going to be kind to you. But, that's part of the deal. And when you talk about the word psychological safety is very important at the moment. How much safety do you provide? Can you make mistakes? Is it possible? And what kind of culture? And when you have a fantasy. When I think about the seminar I've been running for so many years at INSEAD, there's 21 people. They're probably responsible for 100,000 people. And so my fantasy always has been, if I can make them a little bit more humane, a little bit more reflective, maybe it has a trickle effect to the rest of the organization. You have to hope for young. I'm looking for meaning too in that respect. In that respect, I'm lucky being in the education process, but it might be an illusion. So coming back to your question, I cannot give a general answer. It really depends what kind of, some people have a whale of a superego. They always feel judged. There's always somewhere in them, it's like the Woody Allen movie with Mother in the Sky. There's always Mother in the Sky telling you that you're not good enough. And so sorry, let's say mother could also be the father in the sky, but usually it's the mother in the sky. The mother are the culture carriers. So one of their things is that they become more forgiving for themselves, some self-forgiveness. I mean, doesn't mean that I'm not perfect, I'm a bad person. That's, some people, I just wrote an article about what I call the golden larva syndrome. people who have a fear of success, among others. They're afraid they're supposed to become nice butterflies, but somehow they self-sabotage them. And it has to do with somewhere in the sky is floating this sense of perfection, and all the shoots and the don'ts.
I think we can also bring into this, Manfred, as well, the again, what you call the group altruistic moment. So part of the experience is that the group helps to build, if there's trust in the group, then, and the only other point I wanted to add to what you're saying is it actually can become very cathartic. So even though in the moment the person might feel judged or shamed or guilty, it can become a very important moment of catharsis where they move past that.
But catharsis alone isn't good enough. It's a
No.
temporary, they have to realize the relationship and to realize that they always behave the way they do because of certain ways, and they no longer, whatever, 10, 15 years old. They're in a different situation and they don't want the same, coming back to this poem, they fuck you up. They don't want, also, they don't, if they have children, they don't want to repeat the same behavior and give it to their children. They want to do something different because it doesn't make for a happy life.
Yes.
Now, happiness, of course, is a very delicate flower. It's, I mean, someone once said happiness is something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. It's a very simple definition, but it's a very powerful definition. So, but that's still, you have to create happy moments. And that's important. That's your responsibility to get, and you have to do that because, to use a trite statement, life is not a rose garden. You'll be exposed to lots of misery in your life, and all of us are. And so, how to at least create good moments for yourself every day, and that's different. That's important.
Let's thank you, Manfred. Let's look at. I think it was Lisa who had a question. Is that right?
Yeah.
Alicia. Yeah.
Yeah, related to that. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much. It's a really interesting talk. It was just a question around this idea of like reflection circles, and it sounds like when you do them, people have grown a lot of intimacy with each other, and they've been vulnerable, and they've been self-reflective. If you create these groups from a group of people that don't know each other around a common problem, one person says, "This is my issue, this is my case study." How do you, in a very short time, create that vulnerability? Or is it possible, or how does that work when the group don't know each other, they've not been on courses together, they've not done some of that work that you mentioned earlier?
It's a good question. When I do work with, for example, executive team, I learned one thing, which is what I do a quote-unquote leadership audit, which sounds very sophisticated term for us. I interview everybody beforehand because I want to have an idea what are the issues alive. Some or certain organizations are very paranoid, and you say, "My God, is it going to work?" Through the leadership audit, again, I said, at least the person starts to see who you are, and so you can develop that. You can at least explain a little bit why you're involved in this kind of process, and it might be a minimum amount of trust, but before you can really have a robust kind of this critical incident method, you need to do some preliminary work. That otherwise people all there. It's a little bit like what happens in boardrooms. Everybody, even though they supposedly know each other, they're all sitting on eggshells, and not much happens. I mean, there's a lot of. I think people are more aware of this functionality of supervisory board or whatever boards. I'm talking about, but because of the independent directors and things like that. But still, so there are more. For example, inside there are lots of programs now on how to be a board member, and there's also quite some coaching involved. But still, it's those of you who are on boards, you might realize how dysfunctional those boards can be. So it takes a little bit of preparatory work. So it wouldn't be bad to, tell. I remember when I started with the team coaching in one company. Because we didn't have much time, I used the various questionnaires, the ones, the Global Executive Leadership Mirror, the Leadership Archetype Questionnaire, and whatever. But people are not stupid. If you've seen some of those 360 questionnaire, you get some lines of what you see yourself, how the other ones see you, and you get some different dimensions. And you can see you're an idiot in certain ways. You're not good in visioning. You're not very good in coaching. you're not a good team player, etc. It doesn't have to be elaborated. I mean, the thing became more interesting to make the people more human, because what I realize is people really don't know the people who work for them. And to have a different conversation. And I always keep in mind, I ask people, why do you work in this kind of gulag? I said, because I like my boss. And when people leave a company, 70% leave the company because of their boss. They say, we leave because the education for the children want to live in another city, whatever it might be, or the country. But the real reason is they don't have a good relationship with their boss. Now, also, of course, in the process, it's important that people can identify with the boss. Why is the person doing these things? It's not just a psychopath, some people think, but why is the person doing what he or she is doing? To be able to identify it before you start to do these kinds of things. So this is a long answer to a difficult question. It really depends what kind of culture you're in. If the culture is relatively open, if there are coaching culture, fine, you can do it very quickly. If it's in certain companies are very paranoid, I mean, companies are containers of depressive and paranoid anxiety. And if that's come down, it's easy, relatively easy. If it's not the case, it takes some time.
Thank you, Manfred. And we have another follow-up question that's a difficult but very important question, I think. Alicia, did you see Tanya's question?
Yeah, I heard Tanya's, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I need to get to Elko because he's been
Oh,
waiting.
sorry. So maybe we can, you organize it, but I just think also Tanya has
let
had
me
an interesting
do
question.
Tanya, then we'll stop for Elko because it's a follow-up. Yeah.
Okay. And then Alessandro also had a question. Yeah.
Tanya, do you want to ask your question? Hello. We can hear you, Tanya.
I can hear you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Still doing that mistake 2 years on. What does that say? So, for my question is for leaders having and really developing a future vision for the organization is probably more difficult and more important than ever. So, because everything is changing so dramatically, and I think especially the last few months we've seen it in the news a lot. So it's probably in greater awareness. Past patterns don't really help us so much in this new unknown. Which patterns do you think are perhaps really helpful to emerge with leaders in this sort of constellation?
I have no clue. I have no clue. No, I think one thing, of course, is you have to help those leaders deal with their anxiety, so they don't make stupid decisions. So you have to manage their anxiety. And so the fact that you are with other people, we are social creatures, that you are with other people, you can at least test some of your feelings. The thing, you should not fall into what I call sheeple behavior. We are human beings are herd animals. You look at animals when the predator, birds flying, we are also herd animals. And so sometimes the herd is smart, sometimes the herd is very stupid. And so to keep your mind, to use this kind of statement by Kipling, when everybody else is going panicky. So that is, I think, in that respect, if you have certain people, you can test your ideas. And not just, I always say, the moment you're a senior executive, you're surrounded by liars. Everyone is lying to you because there's, I sometimes make the comparison, well, who's the closest animal to humankind? Now, people, of course, say this, the great apes, but which great ape? And then they say the gorilla. No, it's not the gorilla. It's not the chimpanzee. It's a form of chimpanzee. It's the bonobo. And of course, you know what the bonobo is, huh? The bonobo is, of course, not many people know about the bonobo because it's X-rated. Disney doesn't make movies about the bonobo. It's a female society. Make love, not war. Unfortunately, so from DNA point of view, we should have a matriarchal society. It isn't. It's a silverback gorilla society, and so which is very unfortunate. And too many of the silverback gorillas at the moment in the world, coming back to the horsemen of the apocalypse are everywhere, from climate change, nuclear threats, war, terrorism, etc., etc. So, so people may get into anxiety overdrive. And so again, to hold yourself and to be able to say, listen, let me have a cool mind and don't go into a panic mode. We have a tendency when we get anxious that we start to act. And I used to give my students on the MBA program an exercise called Arctic survival. It's basically about a plane which stranded somewhere in the Northwest Territories in Canada. And so there are some items they have to you may have done those exercises, quite a few of them. But the main thing is, apart from ranking what's the most important item, etc., what you do first, don't start running because you die. You basically have to keep you cool. And that, I think, might be helpful in that respect, before you start getting to manic defense and start to act all the time without knowing what you're acting for, reacting to.
Thank you, Manfred.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I think we have something from Elko. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to do Elko and then I'll address Melissa, your question next.
Well, thank you for organizing this learning lab. My question refers to the team coaching and group coaching that Manfred pioneered. And I think once, Manfred, you mentioned that 32 years ago at INSEAD, it was alien to talk about coaching and about leadership. So my question is, when I heard it, I was wondering how in such an environment did you invent or create the possibility to start group coaching? What inspired you?
That's a nice question, actually, for the history of my school. I think at one point in time, under one dean, it was Gabriel Haravini, there was, I think it was a kind of malaise in the economy. And so the Boston Consulting Group, in its great wisdom, was willing to offer its services, make a report for INSEAD at the time. And he discovered, we talk about leadership, but nobody does anything about leadership. Actually, the only one who talked about leadership was yours truly. So at a kind of not a faculty meeting, it was a kind of retreat. I was giving this gift, maybe gift has different meanings, it can also mean poison, by Gabrielle, to start a leadership center. And at the same time, there was a lot of things were coming together. There was the idea to, the program I run, only take 21 people a year. So it would be actually, there was other thing happening that the French government allowed HEC, which is the major French business school, to have some specialized degrees. And HEC would always have liked collaboration with INSEAD. So we started a joint program around the same time called Consulting and Coaching for Change, a master degree. The master degree was given by HEC because they were on the French government at the time, and INSEAD gave some kind of diploma. And so the two deans kissed each other on the mouth and they thought they would live happily ever after. The collaboration didn't last very long, which didn't have to do with HEC, by the way. It had to do with something extremely simple. The hotel at HEC, the students hated it. It was a monopoly. And so I, after that love affair between the two deans, I must say, Gabrielle took it well when I said, we're going to split. And so there were a lot of things coming together. And I think in that respect, we were a little bit Prometheus, and partially it was not Elko that we did a real serious long-term planning. It was very impulsive about how to create some kind of extension of this program I run, but and give it to more people. And so
there's also, Manfred, I think the question also includes the other type of group coaching that has been done first there and now in many other places, other business schools and other universities. And I remember in those days, if I kind of come back to Elko's question, one of the things was that there was a real demand for it amongst participants at that time. I would say it was paradoxical and there was ambiguity because many.
That was not completely, at the moment had no clue what it was. And it was only.
No, but it became slow. Yeah, it did become something that people had heard about, and
it was the seduction. And remember that very well. The seduction was at our school. It was the seduction by Elizabeth, not you, other Elizabeth, to seduce the program directors to give it a try. And it is very hard to do something new because when you put something new in a program, something has to be taken out. And the only reason it worked is that the students, the participants, loved it.
Yes, that's it.
Instead of having
Yeah.
extra course in finance or some more marketing, they could finally talk about their issues with peers. And the ratings were the highest. And as a result, it was really the students who drove it.
Yes.
So then
Yes.
it took a lot of effort because, as I said, any innovation is not so easy, and it takes quite some energy to put in something new in. So it was seduction. At the same time, because of the Leadership Center, there were more and more people who were trained in the coaching process. So it was an interesting synergetic, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And then, of course, after, I think we were very early in the game, and then everybody in the kitchen sink became a coach. So now that's...
So does that sort of address the essence of your question, Elko?
Yes, it does. Thank you. But I was wondering how you come up with something like that, right? Is it coming from psychoanalysis, or is it more based on experience with group relations, or?
No, it came from Cole, to be honest. Actually, we did an experiment at the time. I had an idea: if you have a group of psychoanalysts and put it together with a group of HR directors, and you mix it, something fantastic must come out of it. I can tell you, Elko, it was a total failure. The one who learned something were the HR directors. We tried it, by the way. It was Eric and Roger who became the program directors of the other program. So they were actually, it was around the corner from here. There was a meeting, and actually it was at the Connaught Hotel. It was somebody who was interested. Had a consulting firm, directors towards psychoanalysis, and he had the idea, to set a stage for it. So I said, when you put the two together, shake it, something marvelous might happen. But as Roger and Eric can tell you, it was not a great success. Because
I think what we want to say, Elko, and here I want to spotlight Manfred and his contribution to everything that we're doing, because what I have seen is that it was a leap of faith. So Manfred, as a psychoanalyst and an economist, had a training where he worked deeply with individuals, and he decided, as you just said, he thought, let's try something new. And that was one of those moments that is quite exciting, because it doesn't happen very often. So you have Manfred who had the idea to try it, and the ability and the energy to try to, and it took a lot of energy and a lot of work, but let's give Manfred the credit for seeing that this is something that might work in business schools, and for working hard at it until it became something that we almost take for granted now.
But I was not, let me say again, I was not really so good in seduction in general. It was you. But the two
well, I don't think we talk about that now, Manfred.
And the two Elizabeths.
Here's what Manfred means, is that we could see that this idea of going from working with individuals to working in groups was a very good idea. And again, I go back to this idea of working with the client, meeting the client where they are. It's a delicate dance of I would say an empathetic conversation with people to see if they're interested in this kind of thing, if they feel it would be useful for them, and if so, to open these spaces for them. So that was essentially what we were all doing in those days. But I'm looking at the time, and I want to be sure that we had time for, I think it was Melissa who had her hand up. Is that right, Alicia?
Yes, we did.
And then Alessandro, and then we might be sort of coming to a close after that. So we'll try to keep the answers short, Manfred, so we can have both Melissa and Alessandro.
To keep the answers short, that's difficult.
Well, try. Give it a try.
Melissa, I'm not able to spotlight you, so if you want to ask your question, she might not. I think she was running out of batteries. Why don't we go to Alessandro first, and then Melissa comes back.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Liz and Manfred, for the fantastic and interesting conversation. Manfred, I actually have a question regarding the comparison between nowadays and the past. What do you think is the most underdeveloped competence of today leaders and teams compared to the past, to when you started this long journey around leadership?
Listening. That's very short, isn't it? Listening. And listening to what's not being said. That's very important. That's actually a very important part. When people say something about but or maybe, I'm not sure, say, what do you mean? And to ask a follow-up question, not let it be. But listening is not, I mean, I guess a psychoanalyst and therapist, they spend a lot of time, what they call active listening, to really understand what is really meant. And it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, I make many mistakes. I mean, actually, in a way, in the first interview with a person, everything is there, but I'm not smart enough to recognize it. And afterwards, I said, my God, it was there, but I didn't see it. Why didn't I see what was going on? So that's, by the way, in complex group situations, I find it useful not to be alone, to have a colleague. It makes it more expensive, but you can actually ask yourself, who is crazy? Is it me? Or is it the other person? So you can at least discuss that with another person to do some reality testing, because you might end up in a very psychotic world of, which no reality there. So it's always also that's something I emphasize is coaching. Have some kind of supervision. You get a lot of baggage, a lot of things put on you. And that's the reason, by the way, coaching became so important for senior executives. It was in the past, of course. We have this fantastic person here, but he has this one characteristic which is difficult. Can you adjust it? Can you adjust it? Nowadays, it has become more, still there, by the way, the part is still there. It's more, I need a sparring partner, which is outside the whole system, to get some new ideas and to get some reality testing. And not, as I said, when you're a senior executive, you're surrounded by liars. People have a tendency, because of the guerrilla organizational situation, to tell you what you like to hear. That's also what I'm saying. I think never be a hungry consultant or a hungry coach, because you just become one actually employee. You don't give a frank feedback. So all those things play a role. The other thing about coaching is also, you should sometimes realize when you're out of your depth. You sometimes get situations which are, the person is so, maybe in first place you might relate to the person, but the person might also be, you want to have some successes in life. And sometimes you meet people, when the person is a psychopath, the old story about psychopath is that you do the psychopath test, and if you pass as a psychopath, lock yourself up and throw the key away. They're very good in seduction, and you're not going to be very successful to change this person's behavior. You want to have some positive feedback, don't you?
Thank you, Manfred.
Thank you.
Let's see if we can. Yes, I see a comment says, good to hear you talk about supervision. That's right. That's very important, whether you're a coach or a consultant or a leader. Let's see if we have just a minute or two for Melissa, if she's on hand now.
I think Melissa has dropped out because the battery was running.
Okay.
So why don't we have Margot? We've got about 5 minutes. We can do Margot.
Sure.
So let me spotlight you, Margot.
Hi, everyone. I thought it might be interesting to share my own experience with a program with Manfred. It's been a long time ago, in 2004. I had a corporate career with Unilever and Heinz, and I thought I would learn something about change management. But actually, I learned a lot about the deeper layers of myself. And the same question that Manfred asked you, he asked me back then in 2004, and that is, what brings meaning to you? And I was a factory director at the time, and I realized I really like machines, but I like people even more. I'm super curious about people and how they are the way they are. And I made it my full-time career since 12 years now. And I became a professor in leadership and an executive coach. And, my sense of belonging is with KDVI, and it feels great to be there. And so my suggestion to you is, you talked about, Liz, about a leap of faith, is to take a leap of faith and invest in a program like the Leadership Mystique or the group coaching practicum, where you can learn more about team and group coaching, and surprise yourself what you might learn. And I'm sure you will learn a lot about yourself.
I need more people like you, Margot. But it's
I
very,
would-
very nice what you said. That's very, you never said that to me, so that's very nice. And so in public, it's very nice to hear that. You know, sometimes I get feedback. I got feedback from one person probably 50 years later after the program. He said to me, "Thanks to you, I had the courage because of the pandemic not to do a knee-jerk reaction and fire everybody and fire this and do this. I made some very tough decisions, but I had the courage to do that. And that was very nice. And of course, I like feedback a little bit quicker than 50 years later, but you know, it is nice. It's nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Manfred. I think that some of the feedback is here we are. There are 70 of us in this this call because we're always interested to spend time with Manfred Kets de Vries. I wonder if Oriane would like to say a word or two before we come to a close, just to, in case.
I don't have anything particular planned except for, you know, you must understand that I've heard my father speak about this quite a lot, and I always find it interesting. And I think it's quite a complicated topic, even though it's very human, because it's hard to understand the experience that people go through when they go on a program like this. I've had the benefit of seeing him in action, and I see how he works with the group to try and loosen them up, feel more comfortable in the room. He challenges them, he puts them in the spotlight, doesn't let them slip away and provide only superficial answers, but really forces them to think a little deeper. He gives them a sense of comfort, creates an environment where people can make mistakes, and where they really start to learn how to coach each other, because that, I think, is beyond learning about yourself, which of course everybody wants to come to the program for that. But what they're doing in the process of being amongst 15 other individuals, they're learning how to interpret the behavior of others and the reason why people maybe behave the way they do, why they have chosen to work in the field they work in, and how to make sense of their lives and the lives of others across time. He often says that, is it Kierkegaard who says, the tragedy of life is that you have to live your life forward, but you only understand it backwards. And this is a space where you can, and where the leaders can take a moment to try to understand their lives in a bigger picture way, and with the glasses of lots of other people being put on. I think it's quite momentous moment, because you don't very often have a time when you tell your story and so many other people sit with your story and try to understand it with you. That's, I think, very unusual.
I see there's Fasia. Fasia, you ever make a comment? From Kuala Lumpur, I'm curious what your reaction is.
Yeah, I was just making a free association, Manfred, thinking about you as Colonel Sanders, who built a very nice kind of fried chicken, and today is famous all over the world. And you started the leadership and coaching, and today every business school is following you. And that must be a credit that we should give to you, which probably has not been properly recognized and given to you, I believe. Yeah.
That's very nice of you. I never saw myself as Kentucky Fried Chicken, though. That's
Oh, well, thank you very much. I think we've reached our time boundary, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending, for your thoughts. I'm sure that that Oriane and everyone would be open to any afterthoughts that you have that you'd like to share, or any further contact or information you'd like, just about anything we've been talking about. And to thank Alicia and Stephanie for helping to get this smoothly organized and running. And most of all, thank you, Manfred. Thank you for your generosity, for your generativity, for your the way you naturally show up as yourself, which is a fantastic role model for all of us. And with that,
by the way, I have to thank you. Last week, you don't know that, I was wearing a gown and parading in a procession in the Free University. And there was Liz and did a fantastic job to defend her dissertation. And it was a very touching moment, I must say. And I'm very proud of you in that respect.
Thank you, Manfred. And then I hand the compliment right back to you and say, this is another way that Manfred is a role model for us all. The sharing of the credit, the generous thanks, the warm inclusiveness. And thank you again, Manfred. It all stems from you in some way or another. With that, I think we'll say thank you. Those of you who have to go, goodbye. See you soon. Keep in touch. Thank you very much.